Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler. This is where we talk about role-playing games, apparently, but that's not really what we're here for today. No, the topic for today is very specific. For those of you who are wanting something like this, we're going to go cover building amazing modular castles for adventures. And the trick is here that all castles are modular, because there really was never one particular design for a castle in medieval times, which means you are possible for you to build pretty much anything you like under the sun. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a list of various rooms that would be associated with a castle, and then you can decide from there what you include in your castle. I will certainly highlight the ones you would normally have that are pretty standard, no matter what kind of castle you have, whether it be a small castle or a large castle. So first off, almost always there's some sort of gatehouse, even on a small castle. It might well simply be part of the keep itself. The Great Hall, you almost always have a Great Hall. This is where people sleep, they eat here, they talk about stuff. It's like a living room. It's where you do almost everything. A chapel's not a standard thing, but you certainly could have a chapel in a larger castle. A kitchen area. Now the kitchen area in a small castle is going to be just part of the Great Hall where the fireplace is, but you can have kitchen areas if you wanted. Stables, not always required, but you might have some sort of temporary stable area outside of a single keep building, but stables in a large castle are pretty standard. Something like a workshop or a smithy. For a large castle you'd have something like that. The keep itself is the fortified central tower. This is where as I said, this is where people sleep. This is where the Great Hall is. It depends on the keep size too, like how many different rooms you can have in it. So you would certainly have a keep, and it would be made up of, your Great Hall and your sleeping quarters. You're going to have a water well. You're going to have a bore in the ground somewhere. You'll have a bailey of some kind if you have a larger castle. If it's just a single keep tower, then you won't, but a bailey area. This is basically your courtyard. You need towers. If you have a large castle, you'll have towers around the walls. You'll need a curtain wall, which is basically the outer wall of your castle if you've got a larger castle. The dungeon, this is where we keep prisoners. You're going to have a moat. If you have a large castle, you might have dug a trench around this thing and filled it with water. You might have torture chambers for larger castles down below. An execution chamber also could be connected. So both the torture chamber and the execution chamber, if they are separate, may be connected to the dungeon. Usually they will be. You might have an oubliette, which is basically a place where you leave people to die. Okay, pretty horrible. Pantry, you need a place to actually store food, and you might also have a larder. And there's a difference between the pantry and the larder, certainly for larger castles. One is for perishable items, one is for storing meat and keeping things cold. Okay, you have your dining room for larger castles. You have drawing rooms, which is basically like a specialized living room, really. You have bedrooms. The barbican, you have the storage rooms for various things. Like it's not just food that you need to store. You need to store a lot of other things. You might have a ballroom for a very large, extravagant castle. You have the library. You have bathrooms, or at least one bathroom. You might have cellars down below. These are where you would store your alcohol and your wine and stuff like that. But you might have a cellar for that purpose. You'll have your lavatory, which is also called a garderobe, which I'm not really sure I understand exactly why it's called that. It's essentially a toilet. Okay. You have your ice house, and the ice house is basically what it sounds like. It's a place where you keep things cool. You've got the solar room, which is another type of living room. You have the boa room, again, a variation on this. Wardrobes, you might have entire rooms set aside, small rooms, as wardrobes. You have your portcullis area. You have your throne room or an audience chamber, which might well serve the same purpose. You might wind up with a great hall that serves the purpose as the throne room or audience chamber, and it's all in one, but they might be separated as well. The buttery, the bottlery. Now, the buttery is what it sounds like. You're churning butter. The bottlery is storing bottles. We'll get more into that. Casement. Now, the casements, I'm going to explain more about that later. Place of arms is where troops gather, basically. You have the war room or the map room. This is where all the planning for all of your assaults, or at least repelling those who are trying to get into your castle, this is where all the planning takes place. You might have a big table and a map there. You have kennels. Now, kennels are for keeping your dogs, if you have dogs, but you might also have a dovecot. Now, what is a dovecot? It's basically a building where you keep birds. And you use them for what purpose? Well, I suppose you could eat them, but they're also used for sending messages by air. This is your new, this is the old version of email, basically. You will have some sort of waste disposal system. It might be very simple. You might even have escape routes and tunnels in your castle that allow you to move around quickly, mostly to escape when the castle is finally ransacked by the intruders, the invaders. So a lot of different things. So once you have a list of the kinds of rooms that you will want in your castle, this is where you can actually start building it. And this is where you start doing your mapping. And I would suggest decide how complicated you want your castle to be first, and then include the rooms. Write down a list of the rooms you want, and then you're going to assign them and decide where they're going to be. Hopefully this was useful to you. I hope it was. Thank you to my patrons who support me on Patreon every single week. I want to thank you for watching, and we will be coming back and going to far more detail on castles in the future. Hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.